Hi, I'm Nick Morganmore.
And I'm Zandy Anderson. Say, Nick, did you hear about the rally on Tuesday at the Supreme Court building in Montgomery, Alabama, the one for marriage equality?
What?
Yeah, we're rallying for marriage equality. We think that same-sex couples should be allowed to get married.
But, wait, what year?
Oh, this is 2016. I understand your confusion. However, Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore just issued an order demanding that same-sex couples not be issued marriage licenses in Alabama.
Oh, well, that guy sucks donkey dicks.
Well, yes, but that's his pastime. It's nobody's business.
Okay. But he should be doing his job.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can suck donkey dicks when you have time, but, you have to do your job, which is abiding by the Supreme Court of the United States, their ruling, which said that, everybody can get married.
Oh, if they want to.
Yeah, if they want to, yes. Consent is important.
Okay, good. So, what we're going down there to say?
Oh, yeah. So the rally on Tuesday, January 12th, 2016, we're all going to meet at the Supreme Court building to demand that Chief Justice Roy Moore be removed from the bench. Because, well, you said, he sucks donkey balls, but the real reason is that he's just unethical and incompetent.
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So, what time?
12 o'clock, noon.
Lunch breaks.
Yeah, lunch breaks.
So if you're in Montgomery, Alabama, and you have a lunch break or nothing to do on Tuesday, and you believe in marriage equality,
and rights,
and that Chief Justice Roy Moore sucks donkey dicks,
if you believe that
moles.
if you believe the year is 2016, please meet us at the Supreme Court building in Montgomery, Alabama, on Tuesday the 12th at noon.
Bring a protest sign, or one will be provided for you.
Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, and I am joined once again by my co-host, Ari Coleman.
Hello, peoples.
So, before jumping into the show, I wanted to talk about one cool thing real quick. So, got a couple of new patrons for the show. Super excited, super grateful. And that has allowed us to get a call-in number for the show from Skype. So, yes. If you want to call, you'll be able to call in, obviously, while we're doing live shows, when we do those. But, you can also call and leave us voicemails. And the phone number is 513-878-0-GAY.
Oh, yes.
which is kind of the greatest thing ever. So again, that's 513-878-0-GAY or 0429. So you can call and leave us messages. And like I said, when we do live episodes, you'll be able to call in for that. This episode, we're going to be tackling kind of a heavy subject. I want to throw out kind of a heavy trigger warning, content notice, all of that kind of stuff. This episode, we're going to be talking about sexual violence and its prevalence in general society and the LGBT community specifically. It's a subject that's kind of near and dear to my heart, super important to me, even though it's not something that I have personal experience with. It's something that I'm passionate about. So I thought it was important for us to have a conversation. So obviously we're going to be tackling some pretty sensitive stuff. So if that's something that you're not comfortable with, please definitely do what you need to take care of yourself. And if you feel like you have to skip the episode, that's okay. We'll have a decidedly less heavy topic next week. So joining us, we have Jamie Sivrais, who is the founder and president of A Voice for the Innocent. Jamie, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And also we have Kyle Kleisinger. Is that how you say it?
Yes, Kleisinger.
Awesome. And Kyle is a domestic violence advocate for the YWCA. Welcome to you, friend.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
So the first thing that I wanted to kind of talk about in the first segment here is to just talk about exactly how prevalent sexual violence is in the broader community. Jamie, I know you kind of rattle those statistics off with skill. So why don't you go ahead and do that?
So, I mean, I think in the general population, it's typically accepted that 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men are affected by sexual violence in some way. As far as it breaks down further, like I don't really pay much attention. I used to really feel like statistics were important and I wanted to memorize them and know them all. And it's gotten to the point that sometimes I kind of feel like everyone, I feel like so many different people have been affected, in my line of work that I don't think about statistics anymore. I just try to take stories individually, I know that doesn't necessarily help for looking at a broad scope of the problem. But 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men is typically where I start. And then from there, I don't focus on statistics much more than that. Gotcha. And Kyle, what's your knowledge?
So I'm a data geek. So I use statistics often, largely when I'm writing grants or when I am designing programming. But I agree with what Jamie's saying is, the statistics can really only tell you so much, and I try to be critical of the information that I'm getting as far as data is concerned, because this is a very, very difficult subject to measure, and a lot of people don't report it, even when we're doing anonymous surveys and when we are doing really thorough data collection. It's hard to know for certain what the real prevalence of the number is. Like Jamie said, 1 in 3, 1 in 6 for general sexual violence is my understanding of the recent numbers. I know that as far as rape is concerned, specifically, it's 1 in 6 women in the United States and 1 in 21 men experience what is considered sexual assault or rape. So that's as far as I go with the statistics.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think that's kind of, it's important to kind of stop and take stock of that, because when you're talking about the scope of the problem, when you say rape specifically and you say, 1 in 6 women, I mean, think to yourself, how many women do you have in your life? And so, it's almost statistically impossible that you don't know someone who's been affected in some way by sexual assault. And I think, this subject, along with many others, obviously, is kind of a thing that's still, taboo to talk about. Not a lot of people want to talk about it. And a lot of times even people who have been through it don't want to talk about it for various reasons. Right. So let's kind of talk about that for a second. Jamie, what sort of reasons do you hear from people who, keep their stories in for so long before they finally are able to talk about it?
Gosh, I mean, a multitude of reasons. There's, maybe people not even recognizing what happened to them was wrong. That was the case in my own situation when I was, sexually abused, or it can be, maybe they tried to tell someone, got half the sentence out and got a nasty response, or got a response that was not at all welcoming. And they thought, well, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to try to talk about that again. Or maybe they do know what happened and they feel like they are to blame for some reason, That's not the case, I might add. Like, no matter if someone's been sexually assaulted, they're not to blame. But I think a lot of times they internalize messages that they're told through social media and through just society as a whole. I think that maybe they feel to blame, or I think a lot of times they don't want to get someone else in trouble. Like, yeah, they made a mistake, but overall they're a good person. I don't want to do that. I mean, literally any reason you can think of is valid, and probably a reason that someone stayed quiet, or just maybe didn't feel like they had someone to tell, didn't have someone to report to. I've heard that before.
What about you, Kyle? What's your experience? Well,
I agree with what Jamie's saying as well. there are a million and one reasons why survivors do not come forward or do not ever disclose to anyone why they why a survivor chooses not to disclose something is often a product of their individual experience and what's going on in their life and what pressures are involved. You know, for instance, one of the things that we know about, you know, predictors of disclosure, I guess, is how close the perpetrator is to the survivor. You know, when it's within the family or if it is a intimate partner, it's less likely to be disclosed. Oftentimes because that survivor has a continued relationship with the perpetrator, whether that is a result because they can't get away from the perpetrator or because the other emotional experiences that they have had with that individual that were not related to sexual violence can create kind of a complex set of emotions that surround that trauma and can make it very difficult for a survivor to make the decision to report or to say something or to even recognize that what happened to them was wrong. So.
Yeah, well, and I think that question's particularly relevant now because, you know, we have this whole situation in the U.S. with Bill Cosby, and for folks listening outside of the U.S. who may not be totally aware, you know, Bill Cosby was kind of an American legend, comedian, TV star, kind of like, you know, America's dad kind of personality, and you know, more than I think 40 women now have come forward to say that he drugged them and raped them. And he actually has been arrested for sexual assault at this point. And that's, you know, when you hear people standing up to defend him, so often what you hear is like, well, why did they wait so long to come forward? And aside from the fact that many of them didn't wait so long to come forward, there were a few who tried to report it actually at the time that it happened. And, you know, my understanding was that they were told like, well, that's just part of the business, or, you know, or they weren't believed, which is, you know, so often the case today. So, you know, that's why I kind of wanted to unpack that, because I think there might be a lot of misunderstanding around, you know, reasons why people don't come out and say these kinds of things, especially if it's a person who has, you know, a power relationship, like a celebrity or, you know, a parent or aunt or uncle or someone who is, you know, in a position of authority like that. I think can make it even more difficult.
Yeah, which one of us are in a position right now that we can take down a celebrity? You know, or like,
exactly.
I can't even imagine.
Right. So I pulled up some statistics here. Obviously, you know, it's called the Gaytheist Manifesto because we have an LGBT focus, and I was kind of wondering how these numbers break down specifically for LGBT folks, and kind of a quick rundown. And you know, and obviously these are just numbers. There's really no way to suss out exactly, you know, why these numbers are specifically the way that they are. But just for example, let's see, 44% of lesbians and 61% of bisexual women report experiencing rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. Which is kind of shocking. I mean, that's more than half. And then there's another study that I'm aware of where transgender people report it's like half of trans people report sexual assault, and obviously these numbers are far higher than the general population. Kyle, do you have any thoughts on why it might be higher among the LGBT population?
Yeah. So the first thing that I want to say, I think. If I remember correctly, those numbers came from the CDC.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I am thrilled that the CDC has taken the initiative to ask those questions and to start looking into how this issue directly affects the LGBT community specifically. The methodology and the research there, I would say is actually probably highly underestimating the problem.
Really?
Absolutely. 110%. And if you think about it, the way that the survey is actually done is that you are called. They do like a random dialing kind of survey. And if you agree to participate in the survey, they go through a series of questions. And so if you have a government agency that is calling you, telling you that they are doing the survey and asking you to disclose your sexual orientation, while then immediately asking questions about intimate partner violence and sexual assault, that the response rate is not great. I'll say that for LGBTQ individuals who have experienced that, and we can talk about that a little bit later as a barrier specifically for LGBT individuals who are seeking services or who have experienced sexual violence. But as far as why those numbers are higher, it kind of depends on how you're asking that question. So if we're asking lifetime prevalence, that's including things like childhood, higher rates of sexual abuse among LGBTQ individuals. We can't really say for certain why, but the predominant theory is that LGBTQ youth or children who might later identify as LGBTQ often are isolated as children. They might be gender nonconforming and bullied, or might have conflict at home. That isolation is something that predators can use as a tool to prey upon LGBTQ children and youth. When you add in elements of youth homelessness, you know that 40% of homeless and runaway teens are actually LGBT, and that being homeless or runaway, your risk of sexual exploitation is much, much, much higher than the general population. And then when you start looking into, as adults, why sexual violence and intimate partner violence might be higher within the LGBTQ community, there aren't resources. There's not specific resources, particularly in this area, for LGBTQ survivors. And, I think one of the nearest shelters for specifically queer men, and I don't want to overgeneralize. There are shelters even in Cincinnati. For instance, the YWCA shelter does house men, and they do house people of all genders and sexual orientation. But many survivors don't feel safe there, because, particularly LGBTQ, because while the staff might be trained to, be LGBTQ inclusive, we can't make those same promises about clients. And oftentimes from stories that I've heard of LGBTQ survivors, it tends to be more that other members in the shelter make homophobic or transphobic comments, and they don't feel safe at the shelter. But, additionally, even prevention programming and having conversations about what are healthy relationships, having media representation of healthy relationships for LGBTQ individuals, those are things that we don't generally have. And I think that all factors into a culture of acceptance around sexual violence and around partner violence. And then when you add on top of it the political pressures around maintaining this image, particularly the gay rights movement and marriage equality movement, created this image of queer individuals as being happy and equal, and look at this, wonderful monogamous relationship in front of this white picket fence, and we're just like you, and it's equal, and love is love, and blah, blah, blah. And if that's not your experience because your partner is abusing you or because you went on a date and somebody sexually assaulted you, then we need to not talk about that because that makes our movement look bad.
Yeah, it's kind of a playing into respectability politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, in what you said, I was kind of reading through some more of the statistics as you were talking here, and there was a the National Transgender Discrimination Survey found that 85% of victim advocates surveyed reported having worked with an LGBTQ survivor who was denied services because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So, that's 85%. That is ridiculously high.
I absolutely agree. And I read a very disturbing report about transgender survivors. 1 in 10 had experienced harassment or even assault after seeking services.
Yeah.
In an emergency room. So that is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, any number would be unacceptable, but to say that 1 in 10 survivors of partner violence or sexual assault who actually have the courage to go, and not to say that, it's not courageous to not report either, but they made the decision to go and report or to go and get treatment or to seek help, and they were met with more violence. That's just absolutely ridiculous.
It's unconscionable. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, because that makes I'm not a survivor of sexual violence, and I still, I'm terrified of the police and I'm terrified of the medical establishment for that exact reason. Because I know the statistics, and I know, I know people personally who've experienced horrible things. Just, hey, I think there's something wrong with my heart, so the doctor's going to lecture her about how she'll never be a real woman and refuse to treat her because that's a thing that's actually legal to do, apparently. And to do that to someone who's coming in to report this, what is arguably the worst thing that can happen to a person. It's just, it's ridiculous. Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. I think that's a pretty good rundown for the first segment here. When we come back, we're going to talk about debunking myths. We're going to talk about things like, people crying rape because they regret having sex, false rape accusations, and all that kind of stuff that kind of gets thrown around by people who are more skeptical of the whole thing. So, more Gay Theist Manifesto right after this.
It's a beautiful picture from the Hubble Space Telescope of a distant galaxy, far, far away and long, long ago. And there's a whole galaxy. It's about 1 billion light years away. We're looking at it as it looked 1 billion years ago. So many of those stars no longer exist. And here's an object that's just as bright as the whole center of the galaxy. You think it's a star that's near in our galaxy that just got caught in the picture frame. It's not. It's a star on the edge of that galaxy that has exploded. And exploding stars shine with a brightness of 10 billion stars. They're the brightest fireworks in the universe, supernovae. And because it is the most poetic thing I know about the universe, the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
Get in on the conversation. Join us at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. This week we're recognizing Rob, William, and Jeremiah for increasing his pledge. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons-only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. And welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. This week we're having a conversation about sexual violence. And in this segment, I want to do kind of some myth debunking because, you know, whenever we have a conversation about sexual violence, there are a lot of things that get thrown around, you know, such as things like, you know, how many people have sex, regret it, and then say they were raped in response, the prevalence of false rape accusations, the dynamics of consent when people are drunk, that, you know, rape only happens to certain kind of people and all kinds of different things like that. So I think it's important to kind of debunk those things and, you know, kind of figure out what the real situation is. So, Jamie, let's start with you. If you could pick kind of like the number one wrong-headed thing that you hear, people talk to in your conversations, what would it be? Gosh, can I have two? Okay. Yeah.
And I think both of them are kind of unique, but one of them is just one I'm seeing right now. And it's driving me crazy. Because it is back to the Bill Cosby thing that you brought up. And, you know, first of all, it's important to note that while most people in this country were not directly affected by any sexual assaults that Bill Cosby did, while most people were not affected, most people have an opinion and most people hear an opinion. And that means that those of our population who are defending Bill Cosby are sending that message to people who potentially haven't told their story in their life yet. And that's really terrible, you know. But aside from that, I have, and I have to say, you know, I say this delicately, understanding that I am a white male. But a lot of the defense has come and to Bill Cosby and said, like, this is a race thing, you know. And a lot of it, even further than that, is saying like he was purchasing NBC, and so this is literally like a huge conspiracy takedown. Really? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Come on. I am all the way on the side of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I will happily call things privilege and racism when they are. This man sexually assaulted 40 plus people. You know what I mean? I mean, if we're talking literally about a conspiracy, let's just talk about if Paul McCartney died. Do you know what I'm saying? Like right. Who shot JFK? This is what I'm seeing. And it just feels so ludicrous that the defense, I mean, it's meme after meme from some people that I see and statement after statement. And I'm just like, come on, like what message are you sending to the people in your lives? You know what I mean? And the other one that kills me, it's one that we're seeing more and more, is female teachers who end up having sex with an underage student, you know, and my God, the comments about like, oh, where was she when I was a kid? Or, you know, he knew what he was doing. And like, I know.
Lucky kid.
Yeah. I know people who have, been in that literal exact situation. You know what I mean? Who like lost their virginity to an adult. And they've really had some struggles because of that, you know, like intimacy issues, trust issues, relationship issues. All these things have stemmed. I've had a very specific conversation with a friend of mine about exactly that. And he says, yes, every single issue I have stems back from the fact that I was 14 and I had sex with my mom's best friend. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And was he a lucky kid because of that? Like, come on, like drives me crazy. Like, I don't know, like, there are plenty of others. Those are the two that I feel like just are driving me nuts right now because, you know, and I had to unfollow every single news station because it seems like that same stories come out every week, you know, and I can't handle the comments. It's legit, like actually giving me anxiety. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that people think this way.
I think the two most poignant things that I've seen. Somebody posted something. It was like, somewhere on your friends list is someone who has been raped, hasn't told anyone, and is watching you defend Bill Cosby.
Yes.
And I was like, damn. Cause like, I mean, obviously on an intellectual level, I know that. I mean, I know statistically, like there are probably people who I'm close to who have been raped or sexually assaulted and haven't shared that with me. So that, I mean, that's something to always kind of consciously be aware of, because you never know who's watching what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was, you know, if 40 men call a woman a slut, most people are going to believe that, are going to believe those 40 people that woman's a slut. But 40 women accuse a man of rape, and you're like, I don't know about all that. Right. Well,
like, it's along the same lines of how many more people finally agreed that something might be up with Bill Cosby after he admitted to, I don't even remember, what was the drug he had?
Quaaludes.
Quaaludes, yeah.
Yeah.
Like after he said like, oh yeah, I bought those with the intention of giving them to women. Then people were like, oh man, you know, like.
Well, and wasn't it this whole like second round of this was brought up by someone, a guy bringing it up in his comedy routine.
It was Hannibal Buress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is just, so again, like, you know, we can't have a conversation about this until men decide we can.
Right. Including the one that it's about, who assaulted.
Right.
You know.
And I mean, you can see the guy on news clips. He talks about this shit.
Yeah.
Like, he talks about, like, I'm trying to remember, I mean, he says something about, like, oh, you know, you get these and, you know, people have them and, you know, you give them to a girl and, ooh, you know, like. Right. And I'm like, this guy is, like, happily discussing drugging women to have sex with them. And I'm like, and I see, like, people on my news feed talk, like, and I'm like, are you kidding? Like, that's ridiculous. So back to the subject at hand, Kyle, if you had to pick one or even two, to be fair, of kind of the most wrong-headed things you see surrounding this conversation, what would they be?
Specifically Bill Cosby, or
no, just sexual violence in general.
Some of the most common things that I've heard from like rape apologists are they were asking for it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that looks a lot of different ways, and it's usually not said like they were asking for it, but
the implication's always there, and that putting the onus of responsibility on the person.
Why, you know, they were acting slutty, or you know, they got drunk at this party, and you know, it comes back to like what did they expect was going to happen? Like, of course they like. That's kind of the big thing that I hear a lot, is like that you should have been able to anticipate that your, you know, good friend of 2 years or was going to sexually assault you because you were drunk that night. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I think it comes back to this idea of survivors are responsible for, you know, if you really think about it, the implication is that that survivor is responsible for the perpetrator's behavior.
Right.
And we know that that's absolutely ridiculous. We know that we can't control anyone else's behavior. But when we talk about rape survivors, suddenly that logic goes out the window, you know? That's one of the biggest ones that I hear most often from rape apologists. And then also I hear a lot, why didn't they fight back?
Right.
If they didn't want it to happen, why didn't they fight back? And when I hear that, a lot of times I don't even know how to respond.
Well, because when someone says that, I mean, you have these conversations enough, you can kind of get an idea of where it's going to go from there. And downhill is the answer. So sometimes it's hard to even engage with people who say stuff like that.
Well, but we also see that even in our prevention programming. You know, when we're doing prevention programming that is teaching people to defend themselves from sexual assault, or when we have these kind of what we call risk reduction or rape avoidance strategies, like buy this fancy nail polish and you can, sit at a bar and stir your finger in your drink like a weirdo, and if it turns green, then you were roofied. And that means that you should not drink that drink. And, and for one, we know that drug-facilitated assaults, the vast majority of it is alcohol. It's not these kinds of drugs. That happens in a very small percentage of cases. So that's kind of a waste of time. But also how ridiculous is it to expect people to think that somebody is always out to assault them, and that if you're not taking these extra precautions, or you're not always ready to defend yourself, or you're not always able to defend yourself, then that means that you actually want it to happen.
Right. Well, so let me ask then, so where do we draw that line? Because in my head, obviously taking reasonable precautions to defend yourself, I think is a reasonable thing to tell anyone to do. You know what I mean? Maybe learn some basic self-defense, stuff like that. But I think the important thing is that to tell people, and you can tell me if this is wrong-headed, because this is obviously your profession, but my thing is I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to teach people things like self-defense or whatever, that kind of stuff. But I think the most important thing is that if someone doesn't take those steps or takes those steps and fails, that doesn't put the onus of responsibility on them even a little bit.
I think that's key.
I absolutely agree with that. But where I sit with it is, if you want to go and get self-defense training, or you want to use this, nail polish or this app or whatever it is that's been created that's supposed to reduce the risk of sexual violence, I want you to do that. I want you to do what you feel like you got to do. But as an advocate and as somebody who focuses on prevention, I am never going to advocate for those things as prevention strategies. And I'll tell you why. Statistically, the research that has been done on self-defense programs as they relate to actually reducing your risk of sexual violence, there's not good research to support that it works. The research that is there is often very flawed. And there is also some research that shows that perpetrators become more violent. It's called a parity effect. That the perpetrator uses an amount of force necessary in order to overcome the survivor's resistance. So the more that you resist, in some cases, some perpetrators become more violent. And we know that that's especially true when we're talking about queer and transgender individuals, and when we're talking about people of color. And beyond all of this, beyond all of these, the statistics of it and whether or not it is effective, it's all that's debatable, and we can get into a big academic conversation about it and it's really annoying. But from just a philosophical standpoint, it is never the survivor's responsibility to prevent their own assault. Ever. 100%, bar none. It is not their responsibility. And the survivor is not the disease. If we take a public health approach to violence prevention, we need to start with an understanding that the survivor is not the problem. It's the perpetrator. And our efforts need to be focused on preventing perpetration, understanding what leads an individual to become a perpetrator of sexual violence or a perpetrator of partner violence, and intervening before they do that. Whether that's bystander intervention or early screening and intensive work with potential perpetrators, those are where I believe our prevention efforts need to be focused. But as I said, I'm not going to tell somebody who wants self-defense or wants these apps or risk reduction techniques. I'm not going to tell them that they shouldn't do that or that they can't do that if it makes them feel safer and it makes them if it's something that they feel like they need. But I just believe personally, and as an advocate, that our efforts really need to be focused on putting the responsibility back on the perpetrator and on preventing perpetration.
Yeah, well, and I agree with that. Like I said, I think I think the conversation always needs to be around, whether you do nothing or a lot of things. If this happens to you, it's 100% the responsibility of the person who did it, not you. And I mean, I can even kind of see an inverse correlation. If someone goes to get a black belt in karate and then someone assaults them anyways. I mean, I can almost even see a dynamic where that person might feel even worse, because I did all of this and then I failed.
Well, and if I can be personal here,
sure,
that is my experience.
Okay,
I grew up with law enforcement. I was trained in self-defense. I was trained in everything from firearms to hostage situations. Because I was a police explorer. I actually went to the police department and they showed me how to do these things. That didn't change what happened to me freshman year of college. And in fact, having that information and knowing that it didn't work was almost more traumatizing, because I felt like I could have been able to, or I should have been able to. So that is, I will admit that I have some personal experience and personal bias with a lot of those programs. But I also look at it from a research and academic standpoint, and I don't see the support for those programs. I don't see the research that's saying that they actually work. So
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's a rough thing to talk about. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, in terms of this subject is the subject of false rape accusations, because that's something that gets thrown around. I mean, Kyle, earlier you used the phrase rape apologist, and I'm 100% comfortable with that term. For the kind of folks that we're talking about who tend to, throw around some pretty hardcore skepticism about, when people come forward and say that, they've been assaulted. So, Jamie, if you could just tell me what you know about kind of the truth of what the deal is with false rape accusations.
So from my understanding, and I've seen various reports and studies, but I think it falls somewhere between 2 to 8% of people of reported rapes or sexual assaults being false. I'll be honest, that's another area I don't focus a ton on. My stance is believe. I run the Voice for the Innocent website, and I'm not going to get into details of this person's story, but there was one story that we got on the website that I even knowing how I feel about this particular story, I don't feel right saying I didn't believe it. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
I think I remember the story you're talking about. And without getting into details, I mean, it was conspiracy theory level, like celebrities and presidents involved in that kind of stuff.
Lots and lots. I mean, and all together, in the same. And I still took the approach of, let me find you help, mm-hmm. Because if I heard this said to me once, even if somebody is reporting a rape and it's false, what's the situation that's causing them to do that? Do you know what I mean? And right. If I'm in a position where I can help someone, whether that's someone who is reporting who has suffered a sexual assault, or whether it's someone who has suffered something else and is therefore reporting a sexual assault, I want to find that person help, because that's the kind of person I want to be,
Because at the end of the day, we're not the police. I mean, we're not the ones who are going to make the decisions that are actually going to affect people's lives. You know, like the person who's being accused. Because in general, to help somebody out, you don't even have to. I mean, the person doesn't have to tell you who did it to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you just get that person help because they need help. Because at the end of the day, we're not law enforcement. We're just the ones people come to for help. So
right. Yeah. And I mean, it's probably going to be in the forefront now too, especially with the Netflix show. But like, unless you're Stephen Avery, you know what I mean? Like, chances are someone's not going to jail for a rape they did commit, let alone one that didn't happen. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
I see far more damage in not believing a survivor than I do in believing in it not being true. So that's the stance I take. I mean, like I said, I'm not going to get in a giant debate with a rape apologist. I'm going to be on my way because there's people that need help. And you know what I mean? And I understand the idea of like, well, we need to fight against rape culture in all of its facets. But, gosh, some people I don't have time for. And if you're not even going to admit that, you know, I mean, you see it all the time. I'm not arguing with you. You know what I mean? If we can't even agree that 2 + 2 is 4, then what's the point right now?
Right.
You know, I feel like there is more pressing work to be done. When no rapes are happening, or when we've cut the numbers down by 75%, we can start to have those discussions with people. But until then, like, there are people actually being hurt. I don't need to argue with some men's rights activists online. Do you know what I mean?
Right. I hear that. Kyle, what's your take on that?
I mean, I agree with what Jamie's saying. I'm an advocate. I 110% believe when a survivor tells me that they have been sexually assaulted or that this is happening in their life, I believe them. It's not my job to figure out whether or not they are telling the truth or whether or not they aren't, or what parts they are telling the truth about or what parts they aren't. Because, you know, the reality is that just because somebody is lying about something, that doesn't mean that they're lying about the whole thing.
Well, right, and I mean, we know scientifically that memory is a fuzzy thing anyways, and especially when you're talking about traumatic events.
Absolutely. And, you know, statistically, like Jamie said, it's about 2% of all reported sexual assaults are false reports. And my understanding is that when you even interrogate that number, you find that the people who are often making those false reports are people who have severe mental illness or just major issues in their life. And I can even tell you from some survivors that not necessarily that I've worked with personally, but I've heard about in team meetings, who had made reports of sexual assault that didn't happen. But it wasn't that they weren't sexual assault survivors. It was that the assault that they had reported had not happened when they had said it had happened. It happened at an earlier date. Or, you know what I mean?
I gotcha. So they were reporting that it happened, but the details they gave weren't necessarily the details of what actually happened. That makes sense.
Exactly. And I agree with Jamie to the extent of I don't believe in arguing with rape apologists, but I also don't believe in just ignoring them and cutting them out of the conversation entirely. I used to be very, very big on that. And it was a problem. But I think that it's important to reframe this conversation because this is an issue. This is an individual issue. This is a social issue. This is something that if we are going to eradicate sexual violence, if we're going to eradicate partner violence, we need every single person on board. And that includes the people who right now are apologizing for perpetrators. And the way that when I have somebody who is being resistant to believing survivors or believing, the statistics of, 2%, that's such a low number. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be that all these people are lying. Okay, so what about the ones that aren't? What is the risk that is really run by you believing in this person?
Right,
and
because again, we're not talking in a law enforcement context. None of us are judges or juries or police officers or anything like that.
And if this person was your sister, it was your brother, it was your partner, it was your friend, how would you feel about nobody believing them because they believe that they were a part of this bigger number? Whatever number you come up with for how many of these cases are false cases, how would you feel if someone that you loved and that you cared about was lumped into that number without there being any basis for it?
Right. I hear that. Now let me play. And so obviously, we're talking about a small number here, so it may not even be, relevant on a larger society level. But, if we're bringing personal experience into it, because obviously, we are talking about people's lives here. And, even if it's a small number, there are people whose lives have been largely ruined by false rape accusations. For example, I had a friend that I worked with who, and this was, I used to be on the board of A Voice for the Innocent. And so, for a long time, that was like the focus of all of the activism that I did. And this was kind of in the midst of this. I had a friend at work whose cousin accused him of sexually assaulting her. And so then I was in the position of, I work with this guy. I feel like I know him pretty well. He's a nice guy, super moral, stand-up guy. But they all are. The people who end up doing these things are those people. And he was kind of telling me about, this is the cousin who has several severe mental illnesses, schizophrenia being one of them. And, how he was going to end up destroying her in court because of all of this. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, this is my friend. This is a guy that I know. I don't want to just completely abandon him because someone's accused him of doing this terrible thing. But the nice guys are always the ones who end up doing it. And people with mental illnesses are at particular risk and particularly vulnerable. So I was really, really unsure how to react in that situation. So, because he was my friend, I just kind of, hey, I love you, guy. I'll give you a hug. I hope things turn out the best. Because, that was kind of all I could do at that point. Because I didn't want to, I didn't know how to react.
And I think that's fair. And I think that's probably true of a lot of people, is that, nobody wants to admit or acknowledge that somebody that they know is a perpetrator. It's hard to admit and acknowledge that somebody that you know is a victim, but it's even harder, I think, to acknowledge that somebody that you know and even that you care about is a perpetrator. And I think that we do need to have a conversation around that as a movement, and around what do we expect of people who are committed to this movement, committed to supporting survivors, but have people in their lives who might be perpetrators. And I think from what I know of perpetrator research, it's actually important that perpetrators have support networks, that they have people in their lives who are nonviolent and believe violence is not okay and are holding them accountable.
Well, right, because at the end of the day, the idea is if this person has done this thing, to prevent them from doing it again.
Absolutely. They need to understand that it is wrong.
Right.
And they need to understand that people in their lives believe it is wrong. And if you take away their support network, if you take away all of their motivations for being a part of society and conforming to a nonviolent way of life, they have no motivation to do that. They have no motivation to be a part of a nonviolent community if they're being isolated. And it's not, believe me, this is, I don't want to be, misconstrued as being like, oh, poor perpetrators.
Well, right, but we do. I mean, we do have to have a conversation about how we stop these people from doing this again.
Right.
Because I mean, we're not just going to say, well, like, let's just shoot them all in the head. You know, I mean, the idea is to take people who have done this and make sure that they don't do it again, or take someone who has a potential risk or something like that to say, like, stop this, don't do this, to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Right. And like I said, I believe that the key to prevention and the key to addressing violence is that we have to focus on preventing perpetration and preventing reperpetration. And it takes a lot out of you to have that kind of compassion for a perpetrator.
Yeah.
I mean, part of my job is that I intervene with perpetrators. So I'm not just an advocate for survivors. I also intervene with the perpetrator to get them to not perpetrate again.
Right.
To keep the survivor safe. So, but in order to do that effectively, in order to intervene with a perpetrator, you have to find a way to find some kind of compassion for them and their life and their experience. And sometimes it's easier than others.
Right.
I think it's also worth noting that the distinction between victim and perpetrator is not clear. There are victim perpetrators out there. In fact, a lot of perpetrators have been victims of either exposed violence or have experienced it firsthand or experienced sexual abuse firsthand. It's not necessarily true about sexual offenders. There are different risk factors for that. But as far as partner violence is concerned, where sexual assault might be a component, many of them are also victims. And there's trauma there that feeds into their patterns as adults.
I actually am curious about that. Because I've often wondered, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. I'm not going to be a perpetrator, Right. However, I often, I wonder, and I've never really looked into the research of this, but you hear people say it all the time, and I'm part of the time want to tell them they're wrong, but how many perpetrators, I guess is a huge number that, it'd really be a large study that you'd have to do, but how often do you feel like it is perpetrators have been abused? Do you know what I mean? Or assaulted?
So I can actually tell you what the statistics say. I actually wrote a paper on it this past semester, but I think what's important to recognize is that much of the research that has been done on this is what we call case controls, and we are looking at perpetrators and seeing how many of them have experienced violence, rather than looking at how many people have experienced violence and then become perpetrators, which sounds like you're doing the same thing, but they're actually different questions, and there's different things going on there. It's almost like saying all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares.
Right, for sure, yeah.
And perpetrators, a large percentage of them have experienced violence as children.
Right.
But what the research seems to indicate is that is moderated by other things that happen after they've been exposed. So after they've been victimized or after they've been exposed to domestic violence, are they aligned with the non-offending parent or the offending parent? So, for instance, did the perpetrator kind of bring them into the use of violence? Did they force them to do violence upon another person? What was their support network? What mental health access did they get? Did they develop a substance abuse problem? Did they, there's a whole set of other variables that seem to moderate the likelihood that somebody will become a perpetrator. But it seems to start with exposure. That is one of the most reliable risk factors.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Well, we're running a bit short on time here. I want to get, obviously, we could go for hours on this, just this particular part of this subject alone. But I want to get to talking about what we can actually do as people. Because I'm not a professional, but I'm someone who's passionate about the issue, and I want to know how I can help and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about proper ways to respond to people when they come forward to you with their experiences, and what the rest of us can do to help. More Atheist Manifesto coming up.
Here's an excerpt from Atheist Mind, Humanist Heart by Lex Baer and John Figdor.
The light outside the window was casting a faint yellow glow on the frosted glass, but I wasn't focused on the still beauty of this Christmas night. Instead, crouched at the top of the stairs like a cat burglar, I peeked through the banister towards the living room. Muted conversation filtered up the stairs, along with some rustling in our downstairs hall closet, just out of view. I crept down 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, like a ninja in footy pajamas, until at last the hall closet came into view. I saw my mom and dad chatting quietly as they retrieved the Christmas presents from their secret hiding spot in the closet and placed them under the tree in our living room. I crouched in the shadows, my heart beating out of my chest. I'd just caught my parents in flagrante delicto putting presents under the tree. I gloated silently. I had definitive proof I could share with my friends. I wouldn't say that disbelieving in Santa made me an atheist, but it did make me realize 3 things. First, things aren't always what they seem or what people say they are. Second, supernatural explanations are suspect. And finally, if you really want to find out the truth, you can't just go asking other people. You have to investigate for yourself. That Christmas night episode was the first of a long series of insights that slowly transitioned me from a believing Christian to an atheist.
This book is the result of our combined efforts to fill the void of disbelief that remains after a rejection of God by answering the questions: what should one believe after abandoning faith? And what are the positive principles of atheism? We have decided to answer these challenges in an unorthodox way by updating the 10 Commandments to a version for the 21st century. A version that reflects modern secular thought, science, psychology, and philosophy. A version that is intellectually rigorous but easily understandable, reflecting both the atheist mind and the humanist heart.
Atheist Mind, Humanist Heart. Find this audiobook and many more at atheistaudiobooks.com. The facts you won't hear in church.
Hi, this is Trav Mamone of the By Any Means podcast. The By Any Means podcast is a weekly show where I interview guests about the intersections of social justice and humanism. Just go to www.byanymeans.com, that's by spelled B-I, to hear the podcast and read the blog. Because, hey, aren't we all a little bi-curious?
And welcome back to the Atheist Manifesto. So before we wrap up the show here, I wanted to talk about some practical steps that we can take to make a difference in the lives of folks who are affected by this. Because, I'm not a support professional. Most of the folks listening to this show aren't, but I can say with a pretty high level of assuredness that most of the folks listening here want to know what they can do to help and want to know what they can do to make things better for folks. So, Jamie, could you kind of just go over what your philosophy is for If someone comes to you and tells you their story, what the best way to handle that is?
So we have, with A Voice for the Innocent, this is what we literally teach all of our board members, all of our volunteers. It's three simple ideas, and that's listen, believe, and validate. I think a lot of times people are scared because we do a lot of outreach of people who have been impacted and not directly impacted by sexual violence, because we want people to know how to respond to this kind of stuff. And so we try to encourage people to come onto our site to respond, to just show compassion. And this is how we train them. And I think a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know what to say. We see movies all around us where something happens and then whatever star or whatever supporting actor's got this amazing soliloquy, that's so well written and so profound and touching. And that's just not realistic. We don't have to have a song lyric ready to go. Sometimes really just saying, I'm so sorry this happened to you, and I want you to know that I'm here for you for whatever you need. Like that really can go as far as anything else. And honestly, like quoting some poetry probably isn't going to sound genuine. You know what I mean? So listening and remembering that when we're listening, it's not our turn to talk. I think those conversations can sometimes get uncomfortable. And so people look for a way to fill that up, or to avoid having that discussion. And really that's not doing any good if someone comes to you and says they've been sexually assaulted and you're trying to fill that up with your own stuff to talk about. That's really not effective. Like we want to help these people. So listen to them, let them talk, believe them. And that's such an important part of it is believe them. Like especially if you're the first person that you're telling, or that person is telling, you are paving the way for them and how they are going to be able to tell people their story in the future. And if you give any kind of negative response, it's going to be harder for them, whether that means telling their partner, whether that means reporting it to police, whether that means telling their parents, like whatever that might be. It's important to believe them up front. And with that, I also just wanted to say that be careful with the questions we ask. Like, it's not necessarily our time to probe for information. It's our time to lend an ear and be supportive. And a lot of times the questions that we ask they come off a very different way to someone who's been through some sort of traumatic event, to where, we are hearing a tale of a loved one who's gone through something terrible, and we want to look for answers, and we want to say, God, I just wish you hadn't gone to that party in the first place. Not as much as that other person wishes. And you got to think that what they've already thought of that. And our commentary is not really necessary at that time. Just being that supportive person who says, I'm sorry and I believe you. And then it's important, the last step, it's important to remember that healing looks different for everyone. Trauma looks different for everyone. And so whatever they're feeling, whether it's apathy to the situation, whether it's anger, whether it's sadness and depression, whatever feeling is coming from that at that time is okay for that person to be feeling. And it's important, I think, for them to know that. I think a lot of times people, if they're feeling bad about the feelings they have, then that adds extra guilt and it just adds more and more layers. Whatever they're feeling is okay. It's important to let them know that. So it's never easy to hear that a loved one has gone through a sexual assault. That's not easy. But responding can be simple, and I think we know easy and simple are two different things. Listen, believe, and validate. Just let them say what they want to say, and tell them you're sorry. Tell them you believe them, and whatever they're feeling is okay. That's in about 2 hours how we train, our volunteers. So,
Kyle, what are your thoughts?
I think that is a perfect philosophy. There's not much more I could add to that other than oftentimes people, when they hear a disclosure, particularly if it's somebody close to them, there's this instinct to want to protect them and to want to fix it. And you can't. Right. You can't just fix it. And now is not the time to be building a game plan around whether or not they're going to the hospital, or whether or not they're going to the police, or whether or not they're doing this or that. it's not about that at that point in time. Unless the survivor is saying to you, I want to go to the hospital, or I want to go to file a police report, or whatever it is that they want to do. It's important to give the survivor control, and it only makes sense. You're talking about somebody who is telling you, I was just in a situation, or I had been in a situation where I had no control over what was happening to me. The last thing you want to do is to start making decisions and telling them things that they need to do to fix it, and taking control and taking power away from them. So that would be the only thing I would add is listen, believe, validate, and don't try to control it.
Yeah, I think that's
just be there.
Great addition.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's actually something that I kind of hadn't thought of before. I mean, when people have approached me to tell me things, I don't. The only question I really ask is, what do you need from me? How can I support you?
Which is a perfect question.
It's like you said, if that's like, can I go to the hospital with you? Can I go to the police with you? Can I just sit with you and hug you? Like, whatever it is that you need. But I'd never actually thought of that dynamic of, this person's talking about a situation where they were completely out of control, and then all of a sudden you try and take control. That's a dynamic that I hadn't thought about before. And I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I mean, I can just, think of how disconcerting that would be, for the person on the other end.
And it's okay to ask, to say, like, do you want to go to the hospital? Do you want to file it? Like, asking for their consent. You're doing the opposite of what that perpetrator did.
Right.
And giving them the choice. That's important, But there's a difference between asking, do you want to do this, or is there anything I can do, or is there anything that you need from me? If so, what is it? How can I help? There's a difference between that and saying, well, let's go make a police report. We need to go to the hospital. We need to do this. It's easy to fall into that, particularly when the person that you care about has disclosed something very, very traumatizing, and you want to fix it and you want to take care of it, but you just can't do that. Mm-hmm. So
I hear that. So speaking more generally, obviously, that was more a reference to, if someone comes to us and tells us that this thing has happened, how to respond. What are some kind of things that we can kind of do in everyday life? I know, Jamie, you do work with Green Dot, and, you talk about, things like, just keeping an eye out for each other, and, deflecting and distracting and that kind of stuff. So, like, even if we're not, actively engaging with these things, like, what are some things that we can kind of do in our daily lives to just, I don't even know if necessarily, like, prevent is the right word, but maybe shift the culture, maybe exert influence in a positive direction. You kind of see where I'm going?
Yeah, I think not being sheepish about talking about this issue, I think is a big thing. I have a friend who he lives in, you may have met him, he lives in Cleveland, and but he's from the Bronx, and yeah, and he's covered head to toe in tattoos, which I have a lot myself, but he's just got this New York City mentality, New York City accent, and he's got an incredible story of the things that he's dealt with and his journey back. And I mean, he was terribly sexually abused when he was a kid, and I'm not disclosing anything. He's a public speaker, and this is what he talks about, but he went through really terrible things as a kid, had drug addictions, was in and out of the prison system for his whole life. And he's really come a long way and turned his life around. He's got this wife, and he's got these 3 beautiful daughters. And now he owns a company, and in literally all of his spare time, he just gives speeches, and he raises money for the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. And I cannot take his attitude yet into conversations, but when he goes somewhere new where his kids are going to be, he legitimately asks the adults there, do you have sex with children? And he looks them right in the eye and says that. And I don't know that I have the courage to just flat out do that. That's, He also does not use the language that I used. He uses,
Oh yeah, you like the F kids.
Yeah,
he'll say that.
And he says like, I've never gotten anyone that said yes, and I don't think anyone would. But what it does, and I give that example, it's obviously a very extreme example, but he's not afraid to talk about it. And the people that are around him that he sees regularly know that he's not okay with it. And that he's not afraid to talk about it. And I think it's such a hard topic for a lot of people to talk about that if those of us who are used to talking about it are shying away from it when we do it, also it's not doing any kind of service to to getting stories out in the light and getting this issue uncovered. So I think just being open about it and talking about it and not backing down from the uncomfortable conversation that it can be sometime, I think is a great way to at least get started.
And what do you think, Kyle?
I mean, I agree 100% with that, and I don't think that it is. I don't think that it's an overshot to say that this is preventable. It is preventable.
Agreed.
It's not preventable as individuals, but as a community, absolutely, it's preventable. And I think the key really is letting people know where you stand in your social circle, telling people, this is an issue that is important to me, making it clear that this is not okay. There's and there's actually a science to that. There in psychology they call it the false consensus effect. If I have a room full of people, all right, and I have one person saying that this is how it is, that this line, which is obviously shorter than this other line, is actually bigger, all right, people are going to start to believe what this person is saying if nobody else is holding them accountable. Or they're going to, at the very least, believe that what they're saying is true if nobody else is holding them accountable. So the same thing is true with perpetrators. If we have a community where everybody is saying this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable, perpetrators don't have anyone to brag about their conquests or whatever too. And this is more for adults than I would say for child sex offenders. But creating a community, creating a culture where it is understood that this is not acceptable, actually does reduce perpetration. And then, Amy and I actually met at a Green Dot training, and, it works. Bystander intervention works. If you see a high-risk situation, do something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and when you say do something, what does that look like? Because, that can
look like anything.
Okay.
It could be, you're at a party, and you see somebody who is drunk, passed out, and you're concerned that somebody might take advantage of them. You find their friends, and you have their friends take them home. Or you keep an eye on them, and you make sure nobody bothers them. Or you try to wake them up. Or you see somebody who's going up, and you think that they're going to do something, and you confront them on it right then and there. Or you create a distraction that draws attention away from them. There's a million and one things that you can do, and it looks like whatever your personality and whatever you're comfortable with doing right then and there. It doesn't matter what you do, just that you're doing something.
Right. And I think that's I think that's important because when the immediate thing that comes into mind, I think, for a lot of people when you say do something means like, well, I'm going to find this guy and beat the shit out of him. You know what I mean? And that totally does not have to be what it is. I mean, you said, something as simple as creating a distraction, making a lot of noise or just acting like an idiot to draw everyone's attention or something like that. It can be something as simple as that.
Yeah, I think most of the time when you say do something, it's going to be checking in and seeing if everything's all right. And if someone's passed out, you obviously can't check in. So then you do have to watch, but, a lot of times doing something is going to be something much smaller than the spectacle people can get in their heads about it,
Right.
All right. Well, Ari, you've been super quiet this whole time, and I'm just curious if you have any final thoughts before we go here.
Yeah, I've just been sitting here listening. This is not something that I have any expertise in or have any personal experience with, so I've just been listening and learning from our experts here. So that's it.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yep.
Well, I definitely, Jamie and Kyle, definitely want to thank you both for taking the time to be on the show and have these conversations. Obviously these conversations can be super uncomfortable, but it's something that I think is vitally, vitally important. To kind of remove the taboo, because I think that's kind of the first step of making this a thing of the past, or a thing that's so rare that it's barely worth talking about, that it's that kind of thing. So I definitely want to thank you both. Jamie, do you want to talk for a minute about A Voice for the Innocent and what you do? Sure.
Voice for the Innocent is a community of support for people who are affected by sexual violence. So that can be directly or indirectly. If you visit avoicefortheinnocent.org, you can anonymously share a story if you need to. We can connect you with resources in your city and state that might be helpful for you. So that includes crisis centers, agencies, counseling, and legal help. And if you, other stories are up. So if you just want to maybe feel like you're not as alone, like people know that their stories are going to be public and they share them on our site. So you're welcome to respond, and it's all free and all totally anonymous. So, if you got something you need to talk about, please come join us. We would love to have you on our site. That's avoicefortheinnocent.org.
And Kyle, did you have anything you wanted to talk about as far as, what you do with YWCA?
We mainly work with community partners, and we make referrals when people, we have a complicated system.
Gotcha.
But there are a lot of resources in Cincinnati and in the greater Cincinnati area that if you just need to talk to someone, they're there. There's women helping women, and it's not just women helping just women. It's really everyone helping everyone. But that name didn't go as well.
Right. And what about more on a national level? Are there bigger national organizations?
There's RAIN, which is rape, abuse, incest, and I can't remember.
National Network.
Yeah, National Network. Yeah.
Yep.
But there's a national hotline. You can get on the website. I don't have it right in front of me or off the top of my head, but
it's rain.org, RAINN.org. Yeah.
Yes. But there's also the National Domestic Violence Network. They have resources if that is an issue that you're dealing with. There's resources out there. And A Voice for the Innocent is a great resource.
Thank you.
And I want to throw one in there too, especially for the atheist listeners. There's an organization called Secular Avenue. If anyone's listened since episode 1, Noel George, who's now the president of Foundation Beyond Belief, helps run an organization called Secular Avenue that's basically towards anyone who's in a situation where they're unsafe, whether it be domestic violence, coming out as LGBT, coming out as atheist, if they feel that their safety is in danger or they're in a domestic violence situation. That's an organization that will help get resources to folks to get out of those situations. So it's another great organization run by people that I feel like I know pretty well, so I can feel safe recommending them. It's secularavenue.org. So I would definitely check that out. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on the Secular Media Network. I want to say thank you to my co-host, Ari.
Believe it or not, sometimes I talk on this show.
And again, want to thank Jamie and Kyle for taking the time to be on the show. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Gaytheist Callie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. And Ari, you want to plug your Facebook since that's all you have?
I'm Ari Coleman, and I'm super excited about this new phone hotline thingy that we have. So leave us some messages, maybe some glory holes here and there, even though that's not our show, but definitely do it.
Awesome. If you want to support the show, you can make a per episode donation at patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. And if you can't support financially, please at least go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review, because that helps us get heard by lots more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gay Theist Manifesto.